My father broke into my house with a crowbar on a Tuesday afternoon, and I watched the whole thing happen on my security camera while sitting in the dark 30 feet away. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. Christmas Eve morning, 7 a.m. I'm pouring coffee in my apartment, half awake, when my phone lights up. Text from Dad. Tessa, we've decided to keep dinner intimate this year. Just me, Dylan, and a few close friends. We'll catch up with you after the holidays. Intimate. That was his word for it. What he meant was his new girlfriend was coming over, the 26-year-old, 3 years younger than me, and he didn't want my judgmental face ruining the mood. My brother Dylan, the golden child who'd never worked a real day in his life, would be there. I would not. Here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I didn't even type out a response asking why he was doing this. The clarity hit me instantly. Cold and absolute. For 29 years, I'd been the fixer. The safety net. The one who showed up when things fell apart. The one who wired money at midnight, who co-signed loans I knew would never be repaid, who sat through family dinners pretending not to notice when Dad introduced his latest girlfriend while Mom's pictures were still on the walls. And today? Today I was the one they didn't need. I set my coffee down, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady. I bypassed the savings I'd been building for a decade and initiated a wire transfer. $650,000. My entire balance. The recipient? The county bank holding the foreclosure title on Blackwood Ridge, a sprawling ranch in Wyoming that my brother Dylan had tried and failed to buy 3 months earlier. He'd bragged about it for weeks. Called it his destiny. Showed everyone photos at Thanksgiving dinner, talking about the hunting lodge he'd build, the parties he'd throw. Then the financing fell through because, surprisingly, banks don't lend $500,000 to unemployed gamblers. I hit send. Transfer complete. 20 minutes later, I was in my truck, driving right past my childhood home. I could see Dad's car in the driveway. I could see the lights on the Christmas tree I'd bought them last year, the one I'd spent 2 hours decorating while they watched football in the other room. I didn't tap the brakes. I kept driving, watching that house disappear in my rearview mirror until it was just a small, meaningless speck against the snow. I wasn't going to their dinner. I was going to my ranch. Blackwood Ridge wasn't some vacation home. It was 600 acres of Wyoming wilderness, pine and stone, sitting there like a fortress. When I pulled up, the driveway was buried in knee-deep snow. The house looked dark and cold and imposing. It was exactly what I needed. I stepped out of the truck. The wind cut through my coat like a knife, sharp enough to make my eyes water. My name is Tessa. I'm 29 years old, and standing there in that biting wind, looking at a deed with only my name on it, was the first time I felt like a real person. Not just an extension of my father's ego. I walked into the living room. It smelled like dust and neglect and old wood smoke. Leaning against the stone fireplace was a piece of plywood someone had left behind. Painted in sloppy red letters, Dylan's Lodge coming soon. My brother had put it there 3 months ago when he was pre-approved for a loan that never existed. He claimed the space before paying a single dime, already visualizing the parties he'd throw, the friends he'd impress, the life he'd build with money he didn't have. I didn't toss it in the trash. I broke it over my knee. The sound cracked through the empty house like a gunshot. I threw the splintered wood into the fireplace and lit the first match. I watched his delusion turn to ash. It was the warmest that house had felt all day. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Dad, realizing I wasn't coming to fix the turkey or smooth things over with his mistress. Probably Dylan, wondering where his gifts were. I didn't look. I went into my settings and started blocking numbers. Aunts and uncles who only called when they needed money. Cousins who'd borrowed thousands and never paid it back. One by one, I silenced them. It wasn't anger. It was hygiene. Then came the hardware. I didn't hire a crew. I climbed the ladder myself, drilled high-def cameras into the eaves, angling them to cover the driveway, the porch, the gate. I swapped out the rusted locks on the front door for heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts. I drove those screws in deep, feeling the resistance of the wood. The click of that lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't just metal on metal. It was the sound of a boundary that couldn't be argued with. That night, the wind howled against the windows, trying to get in. But for the first time in my life, the cold stayed outside. I sat on the floor wrapped in a blanket, listening to the absolute silence. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like ownership. They thought they'd exiled me to the cold. They didn't realize they'd just given me a kingdom. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen with winter sun streaming across the scarred wooden floors. The silence was still heavy, but now, in the daylight, the weight of what I'd done started to settle. I'd spent $650,000 in cash. Liquidated everything. My retirement. My emergency fund. The escape fund I'd been building since I turned 18, the money I'd hidden in accounts Dad didn't know about, squirreling away bonuses and tax refunds and every spare dollar I could save. It sounds reckless, right? But I don't do reckless. I do math. My name is Tessa, and I'm a forensic accountant. People think that means I just stare at spreadsheets all day. What I actually do is track stolen money for federal agencies. I find the shell companies cartels use to buy racehorses. I find the offshore accounts where CEOs hide their bonuses before declaring bankruptcy. I spend my life looking at numbers and seeing the ghosts of greed hiding behind them. But for all my training, I'd been blind to the theft happening under my own roof. I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd named Family Expenses. It was a document I'd never shown anyone. A private ledger of damage. Line by line, it told the story of 29 years of robbery. There was the $50,000 I'd loaned Dad when his business was failing. A loan that became a gift the moment I signed the check. He never mentioned paying it back. Not once. There was the $12,000 for Dylan's medical bills that I later found out was actually a settlement for a bar fight he started. He'd lied about the broken ribs being from a car accident. There was the $8,000 for Dad's emergency dental work that turned into a vacation to Florida with his girlfriend. Then there was the big one. $200,000. 3 years ago, Dylan got into debt with people who don't send late notices. They send men with baseball bats. Dad called me at 2 in the morning, weeping, saying they were going to kill his son. He didn't have the money. He begged me to save my brother. Told me I was the only one who could fix this. So I did. I liquidated my investment portfolio. I paid off the debt. I made the problem disappear. And how did they thank me? Dad bought Dylan a new truck a month later, a $40,000 Ford F-250. Dylan told the whole family he'd negotiated his way out of trouble himself, said he'd handled it like a man. And I became invisible again. Nobody ever asked where the money came from. They just moved on. Buying this ranch wasn't an impulse purchase. It was asset protection. I knew Dad was running out of liquidity. I knew Dylan was gambling again. I'd seen the betting apps on his phone at Thanksgiving. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for my grandmother's trust, the one fund I'd managed to keep legally separate from them. If I hadn't spent that money on real estate in my name, Douglas would have guilt-tripped, bullied, or stolen it from me within 6 months. He'd have shown up with another crisis, another emergency, another reason why I needed to save the family. I looked out the window at the endless white fields. This land wasn't just dirt and snow. It was a vault. I'd turned my liquid cash into solid earth, the one thing they couldn't weasel out of me with a sob story. They thought I bought it to be petty. They didn't realize I bought it to stop the bleeding. I closed the laptop. The ledger was balanced. Now I just had to wait for them to realize the bank was closed. 3 weeks of silence followed. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that happens before a storm breaks. I spent those days working remotely, auditing a shell corporation in the Caymans from my living room, watching the snow pile up against the fence line. I knew they were coming. Men like my father don't accept rejection. They treat it like a negotiating tactic. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the dark, the only light coming from my laptop screen, when the ground vibrated. Heavy diesel engine. I didn't get up to look out the window. I didn't need to. I picked up my iPad and tapped the security app. On the screen, a black heavy-duty pickup truck crunched up my driveway. It wasn't Dad's sedan. It was a rental. They parked right at the front porch. Dad stepped out first, wearing his business owner coat, the one he wore when he wanted to intimidate a subcontractor. Then came Dylan, looking around with that proprietary smirk, kicking the snow off his boots like he already owned the place. And finally, a third man. Slick hair, cheap suit, holding a clipboard. A realtor. They weren't here to talk. They were here to list the property. I watched on the screen, my heart beating slow and heavy against my ribs. Dad walked up to the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He pulled a key out of his pocket, the spare key to my old apartment in Portland. He slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He frowned, jiggled it, then shoved it harder. When the deadbolt didn't budge, he stepped back, not confused, but annoyed. Like the house was disobeying him. He said something to Dylan. Dylan laughed and pointed to the truck bed. Dad walked back and pulled out a crowbar. Red. Chipped paint. Heavy steel. I zoomed in on the camera feed. I needed to see his face. I needed to see if he looked angry or scared or guilty. But he didn't look like any of those things. He looked calm. He looked entitled. That was the moment I finally understood the trap I'd been living in for 29 years. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. See, a stranger breaks into your house because they want your stuff. A father breaks into your house because he believes you are his stuff. He wasn't attacking that door because he hated me. He was doing it because in his mind, my boundaries didn't exist. He truly believed that my money, my name, and my home were just extensions of him. He wasn't committing a crime in his eyes. He was correcting an error. He was opening a door that had no right to be closed to him. It was a level of dehumanization so deep it looked casual. He wedged the flat end of the crowbar into the seam of the door frame. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house, louder than I expected. The realtor took a nervous step back, looking at his clipboard, but he didn't stop them. He probably thought this was just a lockout situation. Family dispute. Not his problem. Crunch. Dad put his weight into it. The heavy-duty screws I'd installed groaned, fighting against the leverage. But wood is only wood. With a final sickening pop, the frame gave way. The door swung open. Dad didn't hesitate. He stepped over the threshold of my home, crowbar in hand, wiping his boots on my rug. I sat in the dark of the kitchen, 30 feet away, watching them enter the foyer. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just saved the video file. I stayed in the shadows of the kitchen hallway, phone raised, recording every second. They moved with the efficiency of thieves who believe they have a moral right to the loot. Dylan walked over to my couch, the leather sectional I'd bought with my first big bonus, and kicked it. "We can get maybe $500 for this," he said, his voice echoing in the empty foyer. He pulled a sheet of neon orange stickers from his pocket. Garage sales stickers. He slapped one onto my coffee table. Dad was already on his phone, pacing my living room. "Yeah, the listing goes live in an hour. Cash offers only. We need a quick close." He paused, looking around my home with a sneer. "Clean it out. Anything personal goes in the dumpster. We need this place to look like a blank slate." They weren't just trespassing. They were erasing me. They were stripping the house down to its bones so they could sell the carcass to cover another one of Dylan's gambling debts. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap springing shut. I looked down at my phone. The security app had a big red button labeled Panic. It wasn't connected to some call center in Arizona. It was wired directly to a silent relay I'd set up with County Dispatch 3 weeks ago. Casey had helped me coordinate it with Sheriff Coleman. We'd planned for this exact scenario. I waited. I waited until Dylan picked up a vase my mother had given me, one of the few things I had left of hers, and tossed it carelessly onto a pile of junk. Then I pressed the button. There was no siren. No bells. Just light. 8 high-intensity halogen floodlights mounted along the perimeter of the driveway and porch slammed on simultaneously. The sudden brilliance turned the snowy night into blinding white noon. Dad flinched, throwing his arm up to shield his eyes. What the hell? Through the front window, blue and red strobes cut through the white glare. They didn't come from down the road. They came from the edge of the property line, where they'd been waiting. Sheriff Coleman's cruiser roared up the driveway, blocking their rental truck. He stepped out, hand resting casually on his belt, his breath pluming in the cold air. But he wasn't alone. Casey stepped out of the passenger side, holding a thick black binder like a shield. My best friend. My lawyer. The one who knew everything. Dad recovered fast. He smoothed his coat, put on his reasonable man smile, and greeted the sheriff like a host at a barbecue. Sheriff, thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach my daughter. She's been acting unstable, and we were worried. We had to force entry for a wellness check. He pointed at the broken door, shaking his head with practiced concern. This is family property, he continued. I'm the trustee. I have every right to be here. You can verify that with my attorney. Sheriff Coleman didn't move. He stared at the splintered wood, at the crowbar lying on the porch, at the realtor trying to blend into the background. That's not a wellness check, he said flatly. That's a felony. Family property, Dad insisted. Trustee rights. No. I stepped into the light. All 3 of them turned. I live here, I said. This is my home. My name is on the deed. Mine alone. Dad's face went red. You bought this with trust funds. That makes you nothing, Casey said, stepping forward. She opened the binder. The metal ring snapped loud in the cold air. Clause 404 of the Family Trust, she read. Any trustee who commits a felony against trust property is immediately removed from their position and forfeits all rights to inheritance. She looked up at Dad. The crowbar in your hand? The broken door? That's not just trespassing. That's burglary. That's destruction of property. That's attempted grand larceny. The crowbar hit the porch with a dull thud. You trapped me, Dad said, his voice shaking now. You set this up. You wanted this to happen. I didn't trap you, I said. I just gave you the opportunity to be yourself. And you took it. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward. Douglas Weston, you're under arrest for burglary, destruction of property, and attempted grand larceny. He pulled out the handcuffs. Dad tried one last move. He pointed at me, his voice rising with desperation. She stole my truck. I reported it stolen 3 weeks ago. Arrest her. The sheriff paused. He looked at me. Is that true? I handed him a folded document from my pocket. Quiet title ruling, I said. Issued last month. His name was removed from the title after he defaulted on the loan I co-signed for. The truck is mine. Court judgment is right there. The sheriff's face hardened. Filing a false police report, he said. That's 2 felonies now. He cuffed my father. Dylan stood there, frozen, watching Dad get loaded into the back of the cruiser. For the first time, I saw something in his face that looked almost like fear. What about me? Dylan asked quietly. What about you? I said. You're really going to let them arrest him? I'm not letting them do anything. He did this to himself. He's our father. And I'm his daughter. But that didn't stop him from breaking into my home. Dylan looked at the realtor, who was already backing toward his car, clearly wanting no part of whatever this had become. We had a plan, Dylan said. We were going to fix everything. We just needed my money, I finished. You just needed my money. Again. He didn't argue. He couldn't. How many times, Dylan? I asked. How many times have I bailed you out? How many debts have I paid? How many lies have I believed? I would have paid you back. No, you wouldn't. You never do. As the cruiser pulled away, red and blue lights fading into the distance, Casey put her hand on my shoulder. The trust transfers automatically to you now, she said softly. Douglas's removal is effective immediately. Everything he controlled, it's yours. I nodded, watching Dylan walk back to the rental truck, shoulders slumped. He'll call you, Casey said. They all will. Asking for bail money. I know. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. Absolutely nothing. Later that night, after everyone left, Casey and I sat on the porch as snow started to fall again. The broken door frame was temporarily fixed with boards I'd found in the shed. I'd hire someone to fix it properly tomorrow. Your phone's been buzzing, she said. I looked at the screen. 12 missed calls. 8 texts. All from different family members. Demands for bail money. Accusations of betrayal. Threats about what this would do to the family name. I blocked every number. Then I locked the gate. Casey stayed quiet for a while, watching the snow fall in the darkness beyond the porch light. You okay? She finally asked. Yeah, I said. I think I am. You're not alone, you know. I know. And I did know. Because alone and free aren't the same thing. For the first time in 29 years, I understood the difference. The wind picked up, carrying snow across the empty fields. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low call of an owl. The ranch was quiet. Still. Mine. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to fix things, trying to be enough, trying to earn a place at a table that was never really meant for me. I was done trying. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with others, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power and setting boundaries that stick. Sometimes the family you're born into teaches you exactly who you don't want to be, and that's the greatest gift they can give you.